Hey everyone, this is the first part of the notes from chapter 12 on services. It's going to kind of commingle with urbanization because we're going to talk about the size of cities. Do me a favor, please make sure you write out your essential questions, leave space so you can answer them as we go along. I will upload part 2, so there'll be 2 separate ones just to make it work a little better. As you can see, this is Unit 6. We kind of jumped backwards. It is Rubinstein 12, and we're going to talk about how services affect different size cities. All right, definition of a settlement. There's your permanent collection of buildings. People live, people work, people obtain their services. We've talked about the 3 types of settlements before, where they're found, things like that. But understand now a definition of a service: anything that fulfills human want, human need in return for money. 70% of the workers in MDCs are in services. We're all in services. We don't have a lot of farmers, we have technology. Whereas in less developed countries, the majority of people are still farming. So there's very little people, only about 25% actually in services. For thousands of years, people have made their living working off the land, folks, but in modern countries, we no longer do this. We moved to the city with the start of the Industrial Revolution, so we no longer live on the farmland. We now live in houses and work in cities. We have different types of services. Each varies according to its intensity, its education. Services began with the Neolithic Revolution because we were starting to grow more food than we needed, so people weren't tied to the land. We can divide our cities out. You're going to see this again in chapter 13, based on the size of the city. We then look at the size of the services. So metropolises, folks, anything pretty much 100,000, we would call that a metropolis. It can have varying importance. It doesn't matter where it is. It depends on where it is in its region. Megacities, on the other hand, start at 10 million. And the number of megacities in the world have doubled in the last 40 years. Now, you need to understand, metropolises, megacities, these are not equally distributed around the world. Less developed countries, more developed countries, different number of cities. And with the number of cities, number of services. So, services began in early rural settlements, usually meeting society's needs. Burial of the dead was one of the first services out there. Working in religious centers, manufacturing centers. Early public services usually followed religious activities. A lot of it dealt with military to distributing food, storing food. Hey, I have a warehouse. I can store food. You just pay me some sort of small fee and I'll store your food. Now, breaking the services down: consumer services, anything that a person can buy. Providing goods, food, clothing, tools. You're going to stores. You're going to the Walmart. If you're going cheap, you're going to high-end stores, downtown cities. Or personal services. Of course, it started with burying the dead, but you go to your hair salon to get a haircut. You go to the barber. You go get a massage. You get your taxes done. Those become personal services. Business services. These are businesses that help business do better. FedEx and Office Depot. Yeah, you can go in and buy there, but their main goal is to help businesses. Costco, Walmart distribution centers. Those weren't open to individuals when they first started. They were only open to businesses. You go in and buy bulk, and then you resell it at your store. Producer services help people conduct businesses. Okay, this is the businesses selling seeds to farmers, or the tax people working with large income businesses to do their taxes and things like that. Transportation, this is FedEx, this is UPS, all those trucks you see on the highways hauling things. You see a lot of Amazon Prime trucks now. hauling things back and forth. Now, different types of consumer and business services, man, there's tons of them out there. Distribution, communication, administration, personal, repair, teleservices, construction, tourism, business, and financial. All of these can be consumer services. They can also be business services depending on who is using them. Okay, financial. Yeah, your parents use a bank. You might have a bank account, but also businesses have bank accounts. We're going to go back. Sorry. Now, public services. Public services have existed, of course, since the beginning of early cities. Generally started with military protection. We're going to farm. You're going to keep an eye out. Make sure there are no raiders who are going to come try to steal our crops. Of course, as they grew, as services grew, as cities grew. Now, public services exist in the smallest of settlements to the biggest of settlements. It just comes down to size. Tiny little towns are going to have a police force generally. Might be one officer, might be two officers. Whereas New York City has a huge police force. So they're all the same. They're just different the larger the service happens, the larger the settlement happens. Now, the spread of cities. We talked about the urban hearth. We talked about where the cities began in chapter 8. So we have covered that. As cities grew, they added a lot of trade. Cities were built on planned grids around administrative buildings, religious centers, holy sites. Different cities began to specialize. Of course, in the modern era, you have specialized cities. Now, cities have changed, of course, over history of time, dating back to, before the Industrial Revolution, where you had, an economic area and then a center urban area where you had your markets. Everyone came and ran if there was some sort of an attack. After the fall of the Roman Empire, these cities pretty much faded. That's that early city-state thing. That gave rise to medieval cities. Kind of looked the same way, but it was more wealthy people owned all the land, and they exchanged people living there for part of their foods. That's where the serf system comes in for the medieval cities. Age of exploration, European powers began building cities all over the world. A new colony happened, they built new cities. These colonial cities were copies of European cities. You're going to build what you know. In the beginning of the 16th century, most cities in the world existed in what we call the urban banana. I know it sounds funny, but if you look on a map, you'll see London, Paris, Constantinople, Venice, shifting around to Asia because they were on water, they had good land, they had good resources, they sat on trade routes, so it worked for them. Of course, many early cities had everything: shops, markets, homes, offices, religious spaces, all located together. There might have been a city area or a city central area. There was always economic segregation. Even in the earliest cities, the rich people lived up high, so they are away from the smell. It happens in modern cities. Richer people live on higher floors. Hispanic and Asian cities were generally built around something large in the center, dominating, either it be political or religious. Important functions occurred. Medieval cities, on the other hand, generally very small, with winding streets, because they had to deal with sandstorms. You have sharp corners, so if the sand was blowing, it would stop and it wouldn't continue on into the city. Everything was blended in to a small, compact, windy kind of city. Contemporary services, yeah, they exist in urban settlements more than they exist in rural settlements because that's where the people are. If you're larger, you have a higher density, more different kinds of people, you're going to, of course, have more services in those areas. Out in the rural, you're not. Yesterday I was in Missouri, very few services in the smaller towns until I got into Paducah, Kentucky, where there was lots of stuff. If you look at urban areas around the world, you'll see once again sub-Saharan Africa, southern Asia, more and more people, um, or less and less people living in urban settlements. But you see all of North America, South America, uh, Australia. You're seeing a lot more people living urban than they're living rural. Urban settlements with populations of at least 3 million, that's your black dots. Moving up to your red dots, 5 to 10 million. And then your mega cities, over 10 million. You see a whole lot of them in Asia. You're seeing New York and Los Angeles and Mexico City within North America. South America, you're seeing Sao Paulo, you're seeing Buenos Aires, you're seeing none in sub-Saharan Africa, you're seeing Cairo in North Africa. So you can see mega cities. Daily urban systems, these basically are the suburban regions which surround a major city. You can see in the center part of Tennessee, we are in that center green surrounding Nashville, all of the stuff that surrounds, but Nashville becomes the center of that urban system. Cities, of course, began to industrialize after the Industrial Revolution, but it took a while. In 1800, only 5% of the world's population lived in cities, but by 2008, which is 12 years ago, we had broken the 50% mark. Now, more people in the world live in urban areas than live in rural areas. Of course, this is based on the diffusion of industrialization during the Industrial Revolution, the Second Ag Revolution, because all those crops were being farmed with less and less people, which led to people to move to cities to find jobs. So everything there. Early on, shock cities, because so many people moved into the cities. Infrastructure wasn't there. Massive population without sewer systems, without clean water, without electricity. It was you still see it in LDCs where you have squatter settlements surrounding cities because they just don't have this infrastructure. You're going to see less and less of that in MDCs where our cities are grown in a more substantial way and a sustainable way. Sea trade cities, at first during industrialization area, became very important in Europe and America because that's how you were moving products. They focused on manufacturing. They focused on distribution. As more and more industrialization happened, they became less necessary because now we have highways and we have planes. We don't actually rely on boats. We can, and it's a whole lot cheaper to rely on boats from the last chapter, but we don't have to. So seaports are not as big when it comes to the skate because everyone has that ability. Now, you can see the industrialization. You can see in less developed countries, even rural is starting to take a small percentage down, while urbanization is growing quickly in less developed countries. Lots and lots of people are moving to the cities. In more developed countries, you can see the rural is dropping just a little bit, and this has become pretty steady over the last, 1960s to today. That we're so urban, we don't have a whole lot more room to go urban. They have a lot more room to go urban in those less developed countries. Now, central place theory with Walter Christaller. Walter Christaller attempts to describe central places, the center cities, the businesses, and where they get people from. He looked at circles, but, that left gaps and overlays. Where are these people going to get their stuff? He moved to squares when he first looked at it, but then you have a distance issue. From the center to the point is different from the center to the edge. So he finally settled on the hexagon. Please understand that this is a compromise between circles and squares. Uniform distance between the edge and the point. You have no gaps, no overlaps. So central place theory is based on this. And that's what we're going to finish with today and our essential questions as we're going along. So what's a settlement? That, permanent collection of buildings where people get services. It's important because that's where the services are. The bigger the settlement, the more services you're going to find. Of course, jobs since the Neolithic Revolution have, worked very hard. Okay, good morning, everyone. This is chapter 12 in unit 7 about servicing